A local landowner was laying some water pipes just by this bridge here when he started turning up lots of human bones. They were obviously very old, but there was no clue as to who they were or why they were buried here. Now, we know that there was once a leper hospital around here somewhere, and that this was once a major crossing between Devon and Cornwall. And Time Team have got just 3 days to solve the mystery of the Cornish skeletons.
Not a happy chap, are you, Phil?
Not really, no.
You could have done without being in a wet, sticky hole, couldn't you?
Really? I could, yeah.
Are you going to be able to get much out of this pit? It's really claggy, isn't it?
God, it is, yeah, it really is. And this weather didn't help it at all. But this is
Some
the...
bones already there, haven't you?
That's right. You can see the skull there, Tony, and the jawbone there, so...
That's definitely human, is it?
That's
that jaw?
definitely human, there's no question about that.
But we've got no reason to conclude that just because it's here, it's a 14th century leper, have we?
No, it could be almost any date. There's no reason why it can't be prehistoric or Roman or even post-medieval. We need to sort the context out, before we can understand that.
What do you mean?
Well, we need to fit this in, tidy the trench up, fit it into the geophysics here, see if there's, the extent of it, extent of burials, if there's any walls with it, and then, within the whole area we're going to be looking at.
Andy Reeve, who discovered the burials, is keen to help. He thinks that this area could have been part of a leper cemetery, and if he's right, then perhaps geophysics can locate other graves here or the remains of a cemetery wall. But was this area of waste ground part of the land which belonged to the leper hospital? This tithe map of 1845 records the boundaries of the leper colony 150 years after it had fallen into disuse. But Robin has a much earlier description of the site.
A charter of about 1250, it's undated, about 1250, does give us the boundaries of an estate which looked very much like this.
When the hospital was founded on this site, we've actually
That's
got the boundaries.
right.
Brilliant.
For instance, he
But
says...
hang on, let's see if I can follow this.
Have a go.
It would be nice to see if the boundary actually tied up with that,
Sure,
wouldn't it?
sure.
Where does it start?
As the boundaries there wind, to wit, as the water of the Kenzie descends into the river Tamby, which is Tamar.
That's there, isn't
That's
it?
right.
That's the
where
Tamar and
two
that's the
rivers meet,
Kenzie.
the confluence.
Right.
And so ascending by the water of the Kenzie, even to the ditch of Whittemore.
That's the Kenzie. Well, that's the point at where the 19th century boundary leaves the Kenzie, so maybe that's the ditch of Whitmore.
Yeah. And near that ditch, as far as the well which is at the head of the causeway.
Well, that's the road there, so maybe that's where the well was near the head of the causeway.
Along near the causeway, even to the wall of the cemetery of the aforesaid chapel.
So maybe that's going down the road towards the burial, so that fits.
Thence
By comparing the
as far as
charter
the land of the
description with the
park.
tithe map and a modern map, we can see that the original boundaries of the leper hospital haven't changed since the 13th century, and that some of them may still exist in the landscape today.
What we need to do is go and have a look on the ground.
Oh,
I
we
think,
need to
and
chase
see
those
how,
boundaries,
see
see
if
if
there are any of
they
these,
still
if this Whittemore ditch, there's any sign
Yeah.
of that, and this Coalhord Lake and the rivulet.
Great, so that gives you plenty to work on.
Yeah, we're quite excited to see
Off,
what's out there,
people,
won't it?
into the rain, and do your worst.
Thank you, Robin.
If we now superimpose these boundary lines on an aerial view of the site, we can clearly see that the area of waste ground containing our burials is part of the land which belonged to the leper hospital.
Bill, look at this. You think
Well, it's like, could be a grave cut, is it?
it's going through there, going that way.
Well, that would be where we'd expect it to be. It looks very, very clean on that side, and then there's nice dark material, and it is immediately above where our skull is. It'd be really good if we could pick it up at the top.
Yeah, well, I'll carry on the other side and see if I can find the other side of it and follow it on down.
History Hit is an award-winning streaming platform built by history fans for history fans. Enjoy our rich library of documentaries covering key events and locations of the medieval period. History Hit's medieval offering features leading historians such as Dan Jones, Eleanor Janega and Kat Jarman. Not only that, but we've a rich library of audio documentaries covering every period of history through our network of podcasts. Sign up now for a free trial, and Chronicle fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code Chronicle at checkout.
The large amounts of bone already found in the pipe trench show that we're dealing with the remains of more than one skeleton. What's important is to find out if these bones show any signs of leprosy, which means collecting even the smallest fragments so that they can all be examined by Margaret Cox, our bone specialist, when she arrives tomorrow. Can we automatically conclude that those bodies are lepers?
Well, of course, at the moment we don't know which side of the road the hospital was. But they could be, but also we're dealing with a roadside situation. You know, I mean, witches, suicides, people that were executed, plague victims. There are a whole range of possibilities, and with a bit of luck I should be able to turn up at least some documentary references that will rule in or rule out some of the possibilities. And of course there's the locals who also like to think of the possibility of Civil War victims, because I understand there was a major skirmish in the Civil War here, right on the county boundary.
But we ought at least to pursue quite hard the possibility of leprosy.
Yeah, because I mean, since the leper hospital was here for what, 400 or 500 years, you know, in active operation, I suppose that makes the likeliest possibility that they were lepers, yeah.
Well, puddles may be okay for cleaning the odd find, but if this rain continues, then we're going to have a swimming pool here, so it's important now that we protect the evidence in this trench. One other problem this weekend, if we're going to find a context for our burials, is that a large area of this parcel of land has been disturbed by the building of a sewage works just across the road from the waste ground. But for now, we're going to concentrate on this side of the road in an area of undisturbed ground here, which is where the geophysics team are now after their results from around the burials proved inconclusive. John? We've heard rumours that you're getting a bit excited, is that right?
It's looking quite good. I mean, see here, Tony, I'm getting readings consistently 70, 75, in the sort of 70s. And that suggests that it's just sort of normal soil, for want of a better term. Whereas I move in this direction, the readings are going up sort of 80, 85, 95, 110.
Gosh.
120.
Does that mean we can dig here now, or?
Well, I mean, we want to get a plan of what exactly is here, but it suggests to me that these hide readings could be remains of walls, rubble. I mean, it looks as though we're getting good changes. I can't actually identify walls at the moment, but I'm quite hopeful we're going to get something good.
So
But
you get a printout and then we'll
get a printout and we'll have a better idea,
Yeah.
Brilliant.
See you in a bit.
Okay, all right.
Bye.
Cheers.
If we have found the buried walls of the leper hospital, then we're talking about a hospital unlike any we know today. This would have been a self-contained religious settlement built around a small chapel. It's quite a substantial little settlement for the Middle Ages, isn't it?
Well, this is only theoretical at this stage, of course, because we haven't actually got the foundations of any individual buildings as yet. But, yeah, it was, as far as we can gather, one of the largest of the 26 leper hospitals that once existed in Cornwall.
What's this place up here?
Well, that's the castle.
Launceston Castle.
Launceston Castle.
Way in the distance.
And it's really just to give an idea of how far a leper hospital would have been from the town. It's a fair old distance, a mile and a half, something like that.
The original leper hospital, you see, was in Launceston itself. And then in the 13th century, it became usual for these leper hospitals to be moved out so that the contagion could be taken away from the good citizens. And they moved it, in this case, as far as they could to the limits of the borough.
This drawing is based on Carenza's experience of another site and represents fairly new thinking about leper hospitals. But before we get too carried away, we'd better take a look at the geophysics results.
That doesn't really look like I was expecting, John, to be honest with you.
Doesn't look like what I was expecting either. The trouble is, I thought I was getting quite clear wall lines. It's obvious that I'm not. and I'm not quite sure what I am getting, to be
How
honest.
can you say that you're not getting much, and why are you also disappointed when you've got two zonking great black things, this one that looks like a gun and something that looks to me a bit like a building there?
I think we need John to tell us what he thinks those black patches and indeed white patches might be.
The black is the high resistance.
Right, so this could be
So it could be stone,
collapse and
rubble,
Yeah.
or it could be geology.
I was going to say, is it geology?
We're on the
'cause
slope
it's,
and the rock is outcropping close to the surface.
it's sort of following the contour of the curve of the stream, isn't it? So
Partly,
could be-
yes. So the fact I'm not getting rectangular buildings is, the disappointing thing.
Wouldn't it make more sense to extend the geophysics up here?
Oh, yes, I mean,
and
this
see
is
if it's
just...
there. We've only done a
yeah,
little
but we've
bit
got
of
the burials down here, Carenza. If they seem to be articulate, in other words, it's not mixed up bones. It is actually skeletons in the ground. So that's presumably the graveyard or a graveyard.
And that's where you're going to get the chapel.
Presumably down amongst
Near
that.
Yeah, I think you've got to start from the known.
Exactly. That's what I see, just the other side of the hedge, really.
This is the ancient road. We know that on this side there are burials, therefore there is more likely to be from the known towards here than going underneath what is known to be an old road. So we might as well keep within what appears to be a natural boundary.
So the bodies are here, and the idea is that we might dig an evaluation trench here.
Or come off that way from the wall out into those features there. Are you happy with this then, Mr. Cole, that we dig a trench across your field and see what's there?
Not really, but I've said yes.
With this trench underway, we should soon know the answers to two questions. Do the burials extend to this side of the hedge, and are the geophysics signals here showing evidence of buried walls on natural geology? Meanwhile, Carenza and I are facing up to another job which needs doing, checking out the sewage works.
We're just doing some work on the leper hospital that was on this site, and you probably know that the sewage works is right in the middle of the area of the Lazar Grounds. And
While in Trench 2, we've already removed enough topsoil to find the answers to our questions.
So our assumption it was spreads of stones that might be collapsed buildings was one possibility, but it's actually spreads of stones that are probably natural,
Not related.
part of the geology.
There's no solid wall lines, and that was why, on looking at the results, I wasn't that excited.
No. So okay, we would do well not to go on any further with that then, because the farmer's rather apprehensive about digging his field up, and so basic recording job first, make sure we got it all down, and then
backfill.
A rethink.
So that's one theory knocked on the head. We now know that there are no graves on this side of the hedge and no building remains here. But the geophysics team will now survey the rest of this field. Across the road at the sewage works, we've got a new line of investigation, because Roger Williams thinks he can locate an ancient wall which was uncovered here during some building work.
And if I remember right, we had a piece of wall, like the one we found was going like that, and there was a piece going that direction.
Tea would be great, wouldn't it, if we could find
Well, it would be, wouldn't it? I'm thinking, obviously you can't remember exactly where it was. I mean, you wouldn't expect to. Maybe we ought to get the geophysics in to try and locate it.
The general view is that we wouldn't expect the hospital buildings to be on both sides of the road. So if the walls buried under the sewage works are genuine, it would mean that our burials are less likely to be part of the leper cemetery. Mick Stewart and Robin are rechecking the charter to see if we've missed any clues to the location of the cemetery. One thing we are sure about, this was once the Whitmore ditch.
Let's just go on to the ditch of Whitmore, and near that ditch as far as the well, which is at the head of the causeway.
Well, is that the causeway up there, the road coming in from Launceston? Where that car's going along just now in front of the bungalow, coming along that hedge line, following the contour, turning at the railway bridge, which is just over there. That's probably where the spring would be, and then turning down the hedge line back down towards the ford.
So that, where the boundary turns towards the north, that is the area of the cemetery wall and chapel.
Well, that suggests the other side of the road.
And that's where the lodge is.
Well, it could be either side of the road.
Well,
It
yes,
isn't
it
clear
could be
from the
either
chart.
side.
It could be either side. But it's in the area of that return of the boundary.
Well, let's stick with it and see what we get in this field. I think we can do no more than wait to see what the geophysics produce is up this side of the field, And if that doesn't work, then we've
Then
really
we're
got
into
to
the sewage work.
serious.
We're into the sewage works with a vengeance.
We've got a serious thing about that side of the road. Yeah. So what we're basically
So almost the end of a very long wet day. And over at the pipe trench, in amongst the other bits of bone, we're now beginning to see the faint outline of a complete skeleton.
There's the skull and the two upper arms with the lower arms there crossed over like that. We should get the fingers in there tomorrow. We've got particular instructions from Margaret, who's coming tomorrow, that the fingers will be important if we're going to try and prove that it's leprosy. Here's the pelvis, and here's just one of the legs. We should find the other one in there. So we got the whole skeleton, and it is as you'd expect for a Christian, laid out east-west.
That's not a second leg that crossing.
No, I'm afraid that's just a tree root.
We were very lucky, really, weren't we? Because that pipe, if that had been laid another 6 inches this way, it would have torn
straight through it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's been really a roller coaster of a day. What we haven't found, and we're really disappointed about, was any buildings associated with this person. And usually at this time of day, if we haven't found the environment we're looking for, I get fairly suicidal. But I've begun to learn in time, team, that things change on day 2. So let's see what happens on day 2. See you after the break. Day 2, and the coloured pens are out because the news from Geophysics is that they can't find anything other than natural geology in the whole of this field.
Well, this is the problem we have, is that we've got burials in a small area. We don't know how much further they go. I think what Nick and I seem to think now is what we really need to do is try and put a trench, or just a small trench, to see if there are burials at this end of this small area of land.
Sort of here somewhere.
Yeah, that's right.
If it extends that way. Put it in green, somewhere there, you see, because this funny little enclosure is very intriguing. It's slightly higher than the rest of the field, which you would get with constant, reburial, wouldn't you? The bone earth building up and so on. We think we'd like to know whether this cemetery is going on and which direction it's going in. We've tried that. We know the river's there, the road's there, so we ought to come this way. But if we're not getting anything on this side of the road, I think we inevitably now got to think of looking in the sewage farm. We've been trying to put this off, haven't we?
So that means that we would dig the trench that Carenza and I were talking about yesterday.
Well, I think
we'll do the geophysics first, wouldn't we?
Geophysics are located, but I mean, being as they're talking about a wall with a right-angled turn off it, I mean, I think we can't...
So we could get the geophys done straight away?
Yeah.
And we can get on the other trench there.
There's also the possibility of the chapel being in association with this cemetery, if it is the cemetery, so that we could also keep our open minds as far as trench is concerned for buildings.
What, in this enclosure? Yeah.
Look, don't start discussing it again, please. Can we get on?
Pretty though, isn't it?
Very pretty, Rick. A new trench should quickly tell us if the burials extend across this area of wasteland. And Margaret Cox has arrived and has been busy looking at our increasing collection of bones. So these are some of the bones that have been found here in the past. Are they from lepers?
Well, they may be from lepers, but they haven't got any of the bony changes that lepers eventually develop.
So they could just be people who've died from other causes?
They could be people who've died from other causes, but they could be lepers, just that the disease hasn't affected the bony tissue yet. They could have had the soft tissue changes associated with leprosy.
Yeah. What would the bones look like if they were showing any signs of leprosy?
Well, the main areas that are characteristic of leprosy are the hands and the feet, which literally waste away eventually. The bones resorb into themselves and there's nothing left eventually. They come to little pointy ends. And also it affects the skull, and I actually brought this one with me. And this is from medieval Bristol, so close to Mixwell, of course. And what you can see here are the characteristic resorption of the bones around the area of the nose.
Does that mean that the nose, which is cartilage, would actually sort of collapse?
That's right, because the bridge of the nose collapses, so the nasal passages become distorted and congested, and you get lots of nasal and bronchial infection, and that tracks down into the throat, and you get changes to the larynx, which gives the leper the characteristic husky voice, which is associated with leprosy. And so the whole of this area, this is in fact the most important part of the skeleton for diagnosing leprosy with confidence. The sorts of changes that occur to the feet and hands are indicative of leprosy, but they could result from other things, whereas these changes are very, very characteristic of this particular disease. This is an anatomical model of a skeleton. It's what we use for teaching purposes back at the university. And if you look at the bridge of that nose and the sharpness of these edges here and the profile of those edges, well, there is a bit of variation between individuals.
Whereas if we put that one sort of like that, yes, you can see.
You can see that all this is gone. But see how sharp these edges are, Tony? That's what I mean by the resorption causes this. If you like, the bone disappears and it becomes rounded and thickened on the edges. And eventually that would all resorb up, that would disappear and the teeth would fall out. So you'd lose your teeth as well as have a sunken nose. And the palate would become very porous and would eventually perforate through. So you'd have problems eating normal food because you wouldn't be able to masticate properly. So it really was a very unpleasant disease. Well, it still is a very unpleasant disease, as we know.
Well, wouldn't you know it? Just look which bit's damaged on our skeleton. But the rest of it looks complete, including the all-important fingers and toes. And Margaret's very keen that we follow all the latest ideas on collecting forensic evidence.
Phil, if you're getting close to the feet, do you think you could actually cover yourself up so that you don't contaminate the samples?
Are you serious?
Of course I'm serious. If we want to do DNA analysis, and also Gary as well, because you're looking at the hands and the facial region. And the DNA specialist will want those, if there are any affected bones, those are the bones they'll want.
No, I mean,
and we don't want to contaminate
if there's a good
them.
scientific reason for doing
there is,
it.
yeah.
Collecting evidence for DNA testing is relatively new to archaeology, and certainly this is a new experience for Phil.
Feel like a snowman.
Didn't you take your pouch off first? Look, you've got an excrescence on your side. Look. Right.
I don't know why we're bothering with this. You're so riddled with infection. Across the road in the sewage works, we now have another trench underway, which is positioned to uncover the wall found during the building work here in 1993, and could be proof that the leper hospital was on this side of the road. While at the waste ground, Andy Reeve is keeping a close eye on this excavation. And although we've found more of the pipe trench, it's beginning to look like there are no burials here.
The main thing is that if this was a cemetery and a water pipe went through it, then rather like the trench that we came here to look at originally, then there should be shards of bone scattered all over the place when they backfilled it. And at the moment we can't see anything. And all of this bit here is clean as a whistle.
To confirm just how big the burial area actually is, Mick is suggesting another trench here.
If we've got no burials there and we've got this stack here, then let's at least see if this is sterile as well, or if they're coming this way.
What we do know is that we have one complete skeleton and the remains of several others in this trench. Victor's sketch shows us how they cross each other and are not all orientated east-west as we would expect in a Christian graveyard. But what are Margaret's first reactions to seeing the bones in the ground?
Despite the fact that the remains are fairly fragmentary, we'll still be able to find a lot out from the remains. Well, it looks to me as though the teeth in particular are suggesting this is a young individual.
Yeah.
You haven't got any wisdom teeth there at all on either side of the mandible, and there is space for them to come through. So that indicates the person's age below 25.
Right.
And likewise, there's very little wear on those molars, which supports that young age. And equally, the mastoid process, the bony, chunky bit just behind the ear, looks fairly small, which suggests that it's possibly a female.
Right.
Obviously, we need to look at the pelvis in particular to be more confident about that. But my instincts at the moment say we've got a young adult female here.
A leper hospital in medieval times would have had to be self-sufficient, and we thought it would be a good idea to ask the White Company, our experts in medieval skills, to demonstrate some of the herbal medicines that might have been made here 700 years ago. So all of these things would have been available to your ordinary average medieval person, would they?
Yes, they would, yes.
And do they have a cure for leprosy?
No, they knew that there wasn't a cure, Tony. They said that only God could cure leprosy. What they did do, and what the physicians advised them to do, was simply to try and treat the symptoms. As you know, with leprosy, you lose sensation in your fingers and your toes. So you chop your finger, or you'd macerate your hand by accident, and that causes sores, and then they develop into ulcers. So they just dressed them to try and make them stop getting any worse, basically. And that's what we're doing here. here with these herbs, we're making a poultice to stick on the ulcers.
How do you do that?
Well, I've got yarrow here, and this is marigold. They're both for healing wounds. What else are you going to put in, Sylvia?
We've got in there, we've got elderflowers and cinquefoil.
And how do you transform that into a lotion?
Well, we're going to heat it, and because it's got the grease in it and the oil, with the action of the heat, it will draw all the good things out of the herbs into the ointment. Then we'll strain it and put it into pots.
And what's it that Tabitha's making?
Tabitha's making headache pills.
What are they made out of?
She's using this, which is feverfew,
Yeah.
and she's ground it into a paste, which will be for headaches and migraines. We mix that with beeswax and honey and make pills out of it.
Now, normally it's Phil who takes part in this kind of thing. He's so busy up there, he's also streaming with cold. I just wondered whether we could prepare something in order to make him better.
Oh, I'm sure we can, yeah.
What would you use?
Right, we have here licorice sticks, which is a root of licorice. It's not licorice sticks, as you know.
And would that have grown in England in medieval times?
It was imported. It was a nice medicine. And we have elderflowers. Put some of those in. And we want the chamomile. We put all of that in.
All of the chamomile?
Yeah.
Way.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Now we also want some ginger. Yes, small slices, thin slices.
Thin slices first.
Well, if you could carry on with
Yeah.
that, I'll come back later and I'll see
You
if I
brave
can
man.
persuade Phil to have a drink of it, and then we'll find out whether you actually have got a miracle cure. Back at the waste ground, our middle trench has done its job and proved that there are no more graves here, which means that we've got to start thinking about our burials as being just an isolated pit of bodies, which might not be connected to the leper hospital. With this in mind, Robin has gone to Launceston to visit the town's record archive and can't resist a chance to look at the original 13th century charter granting land to the leper hospital.
I always think this is wonderful that something as old as this has survived so much better than the stone and mortar out at the Priory site.
True.
You know, it's inevitable.
It's marvellous, I think, really.
The Aquam de Kenzie, the water of Kenzie, Usquiad fossat under Whittemore to the ditch of Whitmore, descendo per rivulum de Colliver de Lake, Usquiad Tamblam, descending from the river of Colvord Lake unto the Tamar.
Yeah, it's down to the Tamar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's incredible to think that this was written 700 years ago. But moving on, and Robin thinks he may have found another explanation for our pit of bodies.
I was going through Peter's History of Launceston. He talks about the assizes, and particularly the Lammas assizes, the August assizes, held in Launceston, received for 3 prisoners' pits at Lammas. And he goes on at various other points when prisoners were executed for burying of prisoners at Lammas assizes, and each time they talk about the prisoners being buried in pits. Here there's 6 men being buried together, and I've come across another one of a hanged woman also. And I wonder whether this is an explanation for our pit of burials near the footbridge, near the leper hospital.
So you're saying, really, that these criminals were not usually buried in consecrated ground?
Not always by any means. I mean, apart from anything else, we've got references to suicides.
Oh, yes, buried at the crossroads and that sort of
That's
thing.
right.
Yes.
Or certainly on waste ground. And waste ground can also be beside thoroughfares, as this indeed was.
Meanwhile, on the outskirts of Launceston, our trench in the sewage works has uncovered evidence of a wall, only it's not as old as we'd hoped. This is a Victorian wall, which dates to around the time this photo was taken, during the building of the original sewage works in 1898. So, nothing more to do here today, other than backfill this trench and put our heads together to work out a strategy for tomorrow. And while this is going on, I'm going to persuade Phil to try some herbal medicine. Drink it first.
Good God.
And then we'll tell you what was in it.
It tastes lovely.
What's it taste like?
It's quite sweet.
Yeah, it's got honey in it.
Go and take another slurp.
You've got to shrink the lips.
How miraculous a cure is this?
Well, it certainly inhibits your speech.
Is there any?
Come on, get it down here.
What do you mean?
Leave a bit for me.
You haven't got a cough.
So, what exactly is in it?
It had ginger and licorice and honey in it, and herbs that are good for soothing coughs.
It actually does taste like a mild version of today's cough mixture, doesn't it?
I mean...
It's got no nasty additives, though. Slightly
not bad at all.
alcoholic.
And what is this green stuff?
This is your ointment. That's, well, try some. It's an ointment. If you put your fingers in it, you'll see it's like an ointment.
I don't eat it though, do I?
No, you put it on your sores. You got any sores?
Got any sores? Well, it looks like we may have found a cure for Phil's cough. And we've now got some headache pills, in case the weekend gets any tougher. But as far as tomorrow's concerned, I think everyone's come to the conclusion that it's now unlikely we'll find any evidence of the leper hospital. Or is it? Mick?
Yeah?
This is one of these typical time team things. I know that we're very stuck, but look what Carl has just found. See what you make of this
is
lot.
Handmade 12th and 13th century pottery, and it comes from the flower beds of the sewage works. And we talked with the guy from South West Water, and he said that no soil was brought in to landscape the site. So this is all handmade.
So this may be all that's left of the leper site then. It's just what's smashed up in the flower beds.
He's picked that up, or you've just
No, I've just picked it up while walking.
On the other hand, it may not be all that's left, Mick.
But you see, the trouble with the sewage farm is some of it's been dug away, some of it's been piled up, and where it's piled up, it's 2 metres deep or more. We'll never be able to get at that in our generation. Somebody in future may be able to, but this may be an indication of what's there.
So the site might not be destroyed, it might be partially buried.
It might be buried.
Yes.
But for as far as we're concerned, that's just as bad, isn't it? We can't get at it.
In a sense, but on the other hand, we've got our first tangible evidence of occupation.
That's right, yeah.
So a welcome surprise to end the day. And we still have the prospect of new evidence coming to light when this skeleton is lifted tomorrow.
It's a wonderfully preserved skeleton.
It's really in very nice condition, isn't it? And I'm quite pleased as well, because we can now say with a lot more confidence that it's actually an adult female. If you notice the pelvic bones, they're wide and they're shallow, whereas with the male they're much more upright and a narrower pelvic inlet. Another thing that's looking really interesting from the leprosy point of view are the hands. And I don't know if you noticed, but you can see the bones in the back of the hand butting up against the upper arm bones. If you notice that. Well, one of the symptoms of leprosy that results from the paralysis and loss of feeling in the hands is that you actually end up with claw hands.
So you reckon that could still be a leper?
It might be. I mean, it's just a clue, really, because normally in archaeological material, as you know, the hands are extended, they're out straight, and it's very unusual. Now, either the rest of the fingers are missing, or these hands are actually clenched, and we won't know the answer to that till tomorrow, when we can actually start to lift the material.
Day 3, and last night's pottery finds in the flower beds of the sewage works have got everyone convinced that this was the location of the leper hospital. The question is, can we find more evidence to prove it? While on the other side of the road, Phil has only to remove one more obstacle, another damaged skull, before we can begin lifting the complete skeleton.
Well, first of all, I'll try and get rid of this skull. You can see the inside of the cranium. This is all very, very smashed and decayed, so it's not really going to tell us very much. So once I've got that out the way, then I'll be able to block out around the feet, and with a bit of luck, lift both those feet in one go.
Margaret, are there any particular bits of the skeleton that you require, or are you just going to take up the whole thing?
Well, we obviously ultimately want to take up the whole thing, but the three crucial areas are the feet, the hands in particular, and then the skull, because what we want to do is to remove all the soil from the inside of that skull and see if there are any facial fragments that impacted in with that soil, which might again address the leprosy issue that we were dealing with yesterday.
Although we think the sewage works has been built on top of the leper hospital, what we're hoping is that we might be able to identify areas which haven't been disturbed by the building work. One potential area to investigate is the garden of the lodge, a privately owned house which backs onto the sewage works.
Then this is the only bit that isn't disturbed by the sewage farm, and interestingly it's got a yew tree in the corner of it, which, you know, we spotted and wondered whether that was of any significance, because they had them in churchyards a lot in the Middle Ages.
I think they've got dogs.
Yes.
And why do they have these yew trees in the churchyard?
Well, they have them in churchyards because they've got poisonous berries.
Yeah.
And you don't want the cattle eating them. But also they use the leaves for a substitute for palms on Palm Sunday. But perhaps more importantly, it's the source of longbows.
Why do they need longbows in churches?
They didn't in churches, but they had to have bows. Everybody had to practice archery. They couldn't go anywhere else because it was poisonous.
That
so
said,
it tends to be an enclosed churchyard.
It doesn't look terribly old.
It doesn't look terribly old. I thought it was
looking
much bigger than this, but it's
doesn't
not.
look like it. That's the roots
No.
straight there, isn't it?
I think that's all there.
Unfortunately for us, the garden of the lodge, like the sewage works, has been radically altered over the years and doesn't seem to have anything to offer in the way of original land surfaces.
That appears natural. There's a ditch along the boundary.
I mean, so much has been disturbed by the sewage far around here. You know, if we could find one bit that was relatively undisturbed, that would be very useful.
Mick, are you there? This is Nick.
Was that me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, Mick here. Who's that? Over.
This is Nick, and I'm just inside the entrance to the waterworks.
I've just got in front of me the 1946 aerial photographs and also the ones for 1975 of the waterworks. And we found an area which is apparently clear of all development. Over.
That's good. That's good. That's great news, Nick.
Presumably you'll do some geophysics there and see what's there, over.
Yeah, we've got somebody with a CAT scan looking for the live services, but we've also got Geophys here looking for any anomalies. But in the meanwhile, we're going to lay out a trench as close to the road as possible and as close to the entrance to see what we can find. Over.
This is one of the photos which has prompted all the activity. Nick Johnson has spotted that this small area around these porter cabins has remained undisturbed despite the many periods of building work over the years. So with no time to waste, our last trench of the weekend gets started here, close to the old road, and just a short distance from our pit of bodies. Which luckily for Mick means that he hasn't got far to run if he wants to keep an eye on both our excavations this afternoon.
It's pulling through.
It is, isn't it?
Take it steady, that should be almost out.
No
You
quarter
have to pull the root through it. Oh, it's coming through, yeah. Now,
It's
look.
through. Can
Yeah.
you slide the thing underneath?
There you go. Thanks.
Oh, that's pretty
Oh
awful
my God.
state, isn't it?
It's horrible, isn't it? But I'm not very optimistic
no, I was
we're going to be able to
say-
tell whether any of these bones were leprous or not.
Yeah. It's going to be very difficult from that
That's
mess,
right.
isn't it,
It
really?
is.
It's falling apart as
we-
you speak, really.
Yeah.
We don't seem to be having much luck with the critical bits of this skeleton. First the skull damaged, now the feet falling apart, even though the rest of it seems to be in fairly good condition. Hopefully, an examination of the so-called claw hands and the fragments inside the skull could still help us resolve the leprosy question. Over at the lodge, Mr. Hill doesn't seem at all surprised to find his garden filling up with experts, such as Beric Morley, who's visiting us for the day. The critical question is, how much of the leper hospital might we expect to have survived?
What do you think the buildings would have been made of, Beric?
Well, I'd come to that. Either the local shillet and some of the larger bits of
Shillet's
scaly
the
material.
local stone.
Yeah, that's right, which is a slaty sort of stone. Or cob, or just
They
the
could
clay
have just
from
been
cob.
cob
Yes,
walls.
there's lots of cob building around
Because
here
that
as well.
would rot down
That
quite
will
easily
collapse
once the
and
top
slump.
comes off the
Absolutely,
cob wall.
yes. Yes,
Rot
and you
down.
can knock it down and it'll be humps and bumps of clay material.
If it was stone, I mean, it's so close
Yes.
to the road and a main routeway at that a source of stone after the area becomes redundant is easily accessible and could be carted away elsewhere.
Oh, it
couldn't
would have been robbed.
If
yes.
it were decent stone, but the sort of shillet that is used for building around here, just go and look at the walls, isn't the sort of stone that recovers well.
So either way, there might not be the residue left. If it's cob or if it's stone,
I
either
think
way,
so. I think that's right.
we may have lost it.
Yes.
If the buildings were made of cob, a mixture of the local mud and straw, then we'd have little chance of finding any structures. But at the moment, things seem to be looking quite hopeful.
Granite, I think we've got maybe part of a wall in it.
It's going along that direction.
What is this stuff?
What we getting then, chaps?
Oh, it might be a bit of a wall.
Building stone here and another one there.
And a bit of pottery.
And then what's more,
Have we got some pottery?
Yes.
Because, I mean, if we got some pottery from it, that'd be the first time we've got anything that's
Well, we've
not
got
actually...
we've got some of this pottery as well.
this is
Oh,
no,
wait a
that's
minute.
from above the pea grit. The seeds
Just from
it's
the pea
below,
grit.
It's below the pea grit, which this stuff's coming from, and this is the definite, genuine article.
So this is the first stuff we've had that's sort of not from garden beds, really. That's sort of vaguely associated with something archaeological.
Pull that back a bit.
Slate there, it's just come out.
Well, that's looking a bit more encouraging, isn't it, Nick?
Yes,
Over in the pipe trench, our men in the white suits, Phil and Gary, are making progress excavating the clawed hands.
Do you know what
That's it.
There's a scaphoid there.
A what?
A scaphoid.
I wish you wouldn't use these technical terms.
Fingers.
Thank you.
Although some of the hand bones are well preserved, all the important bits, the tips of the fingers, are in too bad a condition to be able to tell if this person was a leper. However, Margaret's examination of the skull has turned up something unexpected.
What we've got are these sort of striations
Yes.
that are cuts into the bone, here and here.
Do you think that might be a weapon or something?
Well, they're cut marks. I can say with some confidence that they're not post-mortem, that they're either done before death or maybe even at the time of death. We don't, I mean, it's impossible to say. But they're definitely not post-mortem. And in fact, if they were situated up here, and if we were in North America, we would say it was a scalping. They're very characteristic of the sorts of cuts you get when somebody's been scalped. But they're in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And we're in the wrong place.
This may not have been what we were hoping to find, but it's certainly an extraordinary surprise. Margaret will now check that there are no bits of facial bone inside the skull, but it looks unlikely that we're going to find any evidence of leprosy in this skeleton. However, at the sewage works, Anne is only too pleased to see that what we are uncovering here is part of a structure. And not only that, but the discovery of these pieces of pottery in between the stones means that we can date it to the 13th century. These pieces are too small to be sure about the shape of the pot, but bigger pieces like this should be much easier for Sue to reconstruct.
We can get the diameter from the curvature, and also it shows the decoration, which are these slash lines, and there's the springing for a handle, where a handle would have attached. And so from this we're actually able to get a good representation of what the whole pot would have looked like.
And I can use that for reconstructing the pot on the computer?
Yeah.
That's really helpful, thanks. I'll get on.
While most of our work this weekend has been concentrated around the burial pit, Stuart has spent a lot of his time investigating the area to the north of the sewage works and believes he has found the site of an artificial lake.
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is all around us here. You see that shadow scarp over there?
Yes,
where the
very
crouch edge
sharp,
is height?
yes.
That would be the far edge of the lake, up to the
yes.
hedge, which is the boundary mentioned in the chart which we've been following, and up to that hedge line over there. And I think it was originally retained in this bank you see in front of us here.
Right, and it's silted up quite a lot in the middle.
I think
is
so.
What that area in the middle is.
My theory is that it was land liable to flood. That's what this natural scarp is defining originally.
The artificial lake would have looked something like this, and could be the Colvord Lake mentioned in the charter.
One of the things I found in the hedge line coming up is a little area where you get a lot of what look like freshwater mussel shells.
Oh yes, yes.
So it's quite probable that they may have been cultivating.
So this might have been a fish pond or something like that?
Yeah, helping to support the colony.
Right.
So as we approach the end of the final day, have we done it? Have we managed to find the leper hospital? Well, your diggers seem pretty happy. What have we actually got?
Well, it's modest, but we are happy. What we've got here is the very bottom part of a wall, and the possible remains of a wall here, and a cobbled surface. You can see the cobbles here. We think it's an entrance going out that way, perhaps towards the ford, and the rest of it has gone in this 19th century field drain.
Now, you describe these things incredibly quickly, and we all nod. Just which bit is the cobbles?
Right. This is the surface. These are the cobbles.
Yeah.
These are stones squashed into the natural. All of that is natural and being beaten around by all the rest.
So when you say cobbles, it's more sort of large stones pushed into an earth path in order to keep it relatively stable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the reason why we're happy is because what has come out of here is pottery. And roughly this is the 13th century, this is the middle in the 15th, 16th century, and that's the 17th century, which is the end.
So we're really very pleased with that, you see.
So what's the story, Mick?
Well, I think, you know, we've gone round the place. We're fairly certain it's on this side of the road.
What,
the
hospital?
Leper Hospital. Yeah. Most of it, you know, we felt was smashed by the development of the sewerage farm, but it looks as if there might just be little patches left, of which this is, you know, almost the last remnants, really.
So what do you think that this pathway might actually be, then?
There's no reason why it can't be going out to the ford down there, is there? Because the river's just literally through the hedge there.
I mean, let's go wild. Let's just say this is the wicket gate out of the enclosure and down to the ford to say, can I have arms? Quick before they go.
Yeah.
It just may be that.
And what then would be the relationship between this and the little stack of bodies on the other side?
None at all, probably, but we won't know that till we've got a radiocarbon date out of those.
So after a weekend of doggedly testing one theory after another, it looks like we might just have done it. We found evidence for a cobbled entrance, which we think could have led into a hospital which looked like this, with a gatehouse and cottages built around a small chapel. But it's equally possible, according to Berwick, that the sewage works here is sitting on top of the remains of a hospital which looked more like this. Essentially, just one much larger and more elaborate building. Steve's been working on a 3D graphic to show this version, which would have been purpose-built by the Priory, with enough room to accommodate about 30 lepers at one end, with an area for worship at the other. So having found the location of the leper hospital, what finally can Margaret tell us about the bones discovered by Andy?
Well, what's happened this afternoon is she's aged about 5 years.
I sometimes feel like that in the afternoon.
We've actually realised that what we thought was the missing wisdom tooth is actually the missing 7. So we push her up to about 30 now. And her dental health looks very good. She hasn't got any bad teeth. But what she has got is bad gums. The gums have actually, the bone has resorbed back. See that eventually her teeth would have fallen out. So
what causes that?
Lack of oral hygiene, soft, squidgy, refined diet can often cause that.
Are you saying that because of this soft, squidgy diet, these could be leper bones?
There's no other indication that they're lepers. There's any evidence of leprosy at all in the skeleton. The only thing we have got is we've got a bit of periostitis on the lower limb bones, which you see as this rough, grainy appearance to the bone. Oh, yeah. Now, that's present on nearly all of the lower limb bones we've got, and it's something that you do see in leprosy, but you also see a tremendous amount in medieval bone. It's very, very common. Now, it's what happens when you actually knock your shins. You break the skin, infection gets in, and if it doesn't heal up quickly, it gets into the bone. And eventually, if it gets really bad, you'll get abscesses, which is the infection tracting right into the bone, which would be nasty and oozy and smelly things.
What about those scratches on the bone, Margaret, that you showed me earlier?
Well, they've become really, really interesting because Juliet's been looking at books on medieval surgery and medicine, and has actually found a nice illustration to show a doctor treating somebody with sores or abscesses on the side of their head. And the sorts of weapons they're using are very similar to these over here.
These are actually medical instruments, are they?
They are very similar to the medical instruments, Tony, in the text, but these are just the ones we use for eating. But actually, it's just as sharp and the same similar shape and a similar construction to a medieval scalpel.
So the cuts might have been that she'd got sores or warts? Or?
Margaret suggested that it's possible that if she had a sore or anything, a sore caused by anything, but conceivably happening in somebody with leprosy, that the medieval surgeons and barbers did know that if you were operating on somebody with a sore, you had to scrape out all of the sore material. You couldn't leave any sore material at all. And if I was operating on somebody with a sore on the head and I was medieval and I was scraping away with my knife to be sure I got all the stuff out, I might well have scored the bone in a similar way. And if I hold them side by side, that is amazingly similar.
It is, isn't it?
Well, amazing is the word that
that's
Margaret
very good,
used.
isn't it?
This is the one you did?
Yeah, this one I did earlier.
So, with an oozing sore on the side of her head, evidence of gum disease, which could have been caused by a soft diet, and sores on her shins, could this mean that she was a leper? Well, Margaret would have to say we can't prove it. The critical areas for diagnosing leprosy were damaged or in poor condition, and complaints like these could have been suffered by anyone living on a poor diet in medieval times. Until we get a radiocarbon date, we don't even know how old these bones are, and all we can do is speculate about who she was.
I don't think it would have been plague burials because they're too shallow, and I think everyone would have known that you would have buried people who died of infectious diseases in deep graves.
Right.
So,
So that takes us down to two possibilities.
Presuming, in fact, she's female, must lessen the Civil War
I would
possibility?
say yes. The female bit does lessen the Civil War bit.
So that leaves us with the possibility of
The possibility of execution
executed.
victims after Launceston Assizes, which I've got in the late 16th and early 17th centuries.
We've arranged for all the bones excavated from the Pipe Trench to be reburied at St Thomas's Church, which stands beside the ruins of the Priory. This ironically means that the remains of the woman we've been excavating will now lie in the grounds of the Mother Church to the Leper Hospital, which, if she was a leper, would have been a privilege not granted in her day. But when was that? Well, I'm now in a position to tell you because some of the rib bones kept for radiocarbon dating tell us that she wasn't an execution victim in the 17th century, but that she lived much earlier, at some point between 1106 and 1286, which means that she could have been around in the early days of the leper hospital. I think there's a good chance that she was a leper, perhaps buried just after the hospital had moved from Launceston and before a proper graveyard had been established.